people are motivated by moving towards pleasure and away from pain, pleasure and pain. And that's not wrong. I think that's still true. I think it's always been true, but I think it's a little more nuanced than that. So then somebody came in and said, like, look, needs are manifest, called manifest needs theory, and essentially just said that we went from hedonism to manifest needs, that sometimes we have a need and that spikes. That becomes the dominant need right now in the moment. It becomes manifest. And so we pursue the fulfillment of that need. And then even if that's a strong need, over time, maybe another need comes up and supplants it or takes its place. For example, like, I've got to get this work done. This is a really important assignment and I'm going to get fired if I don't get it done. So I work. But now I'm exhausted, I'm tired, and I'm hungry. So I go eat. So another need just emerged. And so there's this theory that we have needs, and it's not just pleasure and pain, but that pleasure and pain is associated with a need, and different needs spike and arise at different times, and other needs subside and are latent. And then there's another theory that kind of built on that said, all right, that's interesting, but it seems like our needs kind of fall into three categories. The need for, and this is called learned needs theory, and this is from McClellan, and he talks about the need for achievement, the need for affiliation, and the need for power. Achievement, the need to achieve things, to accomplish things, to make things happen, maybe even grow and just create and do things, right? The need for affiliation, that social need to be connected to others. Remember, we're social creatures when it comes down to it, and there is an innate need to do that. And then the need for power, the need to have some control in our life, the need to have some predictability, the need to have some certainty in our life, and that most of our needs can be formed into one of those three buckets. And so those are the things that drive us. And maybe when one of those buckets starts getting lower, we feel a perceived need more in that bucket. And then came Maslow, right, who said, yeah, and there's another way to categorize these needs. And Maslow originally did this pyramid, his hierarchy of needs, but actually he never did the pyramid. That was, as far as we know, a textbook publisher that drew it in a pyramid so that it looked better, it could sell more textbooks. But Maslow originally said, look, you've got these survival needs down at the bottom with, like, your physical, food, shelter, and that goes all the way up through social, emotional needs up to this self-actualization need. And you can actually work on any needs at any time, but they certainly are at different levels, and you can access them as they arise. But a lot of people think, oh, you have to have the physical before you can have this and this and this. But that's not really true, is it? Because, we see people fasting. We'll see people that will meditate without food or without good shelter, or even people that will set themselves on fire in demonstration and literally essentially kill themselves in public in order to demonstrate and go after a higher need, the satisfaction of some value, some statement, or some form of self-actualization. So I don't think it's necessarily a fact that you have to have these lower physical needs met before you can go after social, emotional, or even higher self-actualization needs. I may be wrong, but I don't think there's a lot of evidence that can just say, absolutely, you have to have it. And Maslow didn't necessarily argue for that in the first place. So then someone comes along and says, okay, I get what Maslow's saying, but I think we can group them into something that's a little more accessible, and essentially creates ERG theory, which is essentially bucketing these needs, or any needs that we have, because there could be a large number of needs, and we can talk about that as well, into three buckets, ERG. So the E stands for existence needs. These are the needs for survival, for meeting biological needs to continue to live, right? Like shelter, water, food, things like that. These are the existence needs that we have to keep existing. And then there's the R needs, the relatedness needs. These are those social needs, the needs about connecting with one another, the needs about having good relationships with others. All kinds of those sorts of needs go into this relatedness bucket. And then there's the G, the growth needs related to achievement, towards learning, towards contribution, towards development, creation, things like that. And so basically, with ERG, Alderfer said, essentially, Maslow's needs are great, but But really what we're talking about is 3 areas of needs: existence needs, relatedness needs, and growth needs. And that there could be a whole number of needs, but they're going to fall into one of those buckets. And that we are motivated to do things as we feel deficits in one of those areas, or as something becomes more salient because of values we have, some perception we have that that's going to get us more in that area than others. Then also in the 60s comes along a really influential theory called from Frederick Herzberg, called motivator hygiene theory, or 2-factor theory, which essentially says there's 2 buckets. So everybody's starting to agree that it's all about needs and the pursuit of fulfilling needs, but it's how do we organize those needs? And Herzberg basically said you have hygienic needs. Those are the needs that help us meet certain things. They're required, but they're not sufficient for greater motivation. But they're required for us to even show up. And at work, it's things like pay, benefits, working conditions, environment, things like that. A lot of people think pay is a motivator, something that helps us to actually produce or give even more energy and more commitment and have stronger motivation on the job. But there's various forms of research. One that I recall says that money's a motivator up until about $70,000. And then beyond that, it's really just a hygiene factor. When we say hygiene, we're just saying maintenance, right? There are factors that you need to show up. And then there's motivator factors, the factors that really propel you, that really entice greater commitment, greater expenditure of energy, greater sacrifice. And those things tend to be around recognition, right? Achievement, advancement, contribution, creation, production, things like that. Things that kind of speak to you more here. So the hygienic needs seem to be more temporal, or on the ERG side, they seem to be a little bit more about existence needs. Whereas the motivators tend to be more relatedness and growth-oriented needs. So Herzberg brought those back to the 2-factor motivator hygiene theory. Then comes self-determination theory from positive psychology. So then comes this movement in which psychologists are saying, wait a minute, psychology has always studied like the sick, the mentally ill, like trying to explain why people do things that are maybe deviant or why they're not working as normal or whatever it is. But what about studying the people and the things that create thriving in life, or the people that are really successful? Like, what is their psychology? What's going on in their minds, their thinkings, their thought patterns? And from that started this field of positive psychology. Yes, these are all very rough definitions, rough explanations. If you're an expert, you'll probably take odds with what I'm saying, but that's okay. I'm not talking to you. So here we have positive psychology, and a series of studies over many years kind of emerged into what is called self-determination theory, in which you basically are self-determined, not having others determine for you. That motivation is coming from the internal efforts to satisfy certain needs. And those 3 needs spell the word C-A-R, car, spell the word car. And I like to say, if you want to go somewhere where you're thriving, if you want to go somewhere where you're flourishing, then get in your car. CAR stands for competency, autonomy, and relatedness. So SDT, self-determination theory, says that our 3 buckets aren't ERG or 2-factor or the need for achievement, power, and affiliation. Although they are all kind of related to one another, this version of the theory comes in and says you need competency, autonomy, and relatedness. You need to be seen as valuable. You need to feel that you're seen as valued by others, that you have something valuable to add, that you're competent in doing something. That you need to have autonomy, which is not the same as independence or freedom. Autonomy means that I am opting in. I am choosing to align with whatever I'm being asked to do or whatever it is that I am doing on the job. I get behind it. I find a good reason to get on board and I opt in. So I use my own autonomy to say, yes, I show up for work every day, not because I'm required to, but because I want to. Right? It's just 2 sides of the coin. I'm required to versus I want to. And the CAR, the R in that is relatedness. That's that social function, right? That we have a need to connect with others, to have good relationships with others, and to have a thriving, functional social environment. So self-determination theory came in and said CAR. Now, of all the theories that I have used to base my work on in organizations over the years, I have found that they all are really good. But for me, self-determination theory is the one that I lead with. I find that in self-determination theory, actually there's one other tool that I use that is probably even more, but self-determination theory is kind of this guiding, really useful tool. There's tons of instruments online that have already been designed to measure things like basic psychological needs satisfaction, and you can download those and just literally give those to your team or your workforce and kind of come up with an idea of where they sit in CAR and maybe find out maybe where they're being malnourished, right? Socially, psychologically, spiritually, physically, wherever it is. I like self-determination theory. I think that it meets all those needs, but that's the key, is that all of these motivation theories. So if you're going to take anything away from this last 11 plus minutes of my rant on the history of content theories of motivation, the key ones, the main ones, it would be this. All of them point to needs satisfaction, that we as humans have needs and that we feel or perceive the need to go and satisfy those needs. And that's what our motivation is about. We are motivated to use our energy to go satisfy those needs. And that the best way to meet those needs is for others or ourselves to create the conditions where we can meet them from inside, internally. And when people do that, they develop a sense of competence and they begin to thrive. And they create thriving workplaces. So if nothing else, understand when you're looking at people's behavior at work and trying to figure out why are they doing what they're doing, or why are they not doing what I'm asking them to do, chances are all of their behavior, whichever way it goes, all of their behavior is driven by the attempt to satisfy a perceived need. So if you can figure out what needs they're trying to satisfy and why they feel they're lacking in that area, and then help them meet those needs, that's what you need to do to create the conditions to have employees that are thriving, self-motivated, and accomplish great things.